better here. What are you noticing? What are you wondering? How can mathematics be used here? Thinking about your grade level. What are some possibilities? Oh, I love that. Conceptions of time. Thank you so much. What else? What might some of the questions be? I love that. Tracking trends and growth. Reading and analyzing charts. Oh, yes. So much of that and making sense of them. What else? What might it look like in a pre-K classroom? This is why I also chose Gloria's lesson, because pre-K students used some of her artifacts and did an activity. Third grade kids did. Eighth grade classrooms did as well. So you can see what they did using these artifacts. I love that. Years, historical times, hours of work in a day. Let me share you a little bit of what others have done. So Gloria's lesson is in 2 books out of the 4. Imagine her doing all this while she was a student and now she's a teacher. Yes, she's an amazing teacher. And some of the things that students had questions about around how math can help us, they were curious about the conditions that led to the emergence of the farm workers strike. What was the conditions? They were curious about understanding the history of how it was organized. How did the UFW become established? They wanted to understand and compare and contrast similarities and differences between stories. Like, what would it look like if we were comparing the stories of Cesar Chavez, a mapping of Cesar Chavez versus a mapping of Larry Itliang, or a mapping of how those two work together? There are curiosities about imperialism and war on the Asian migration, looking at the strength of solidarity, and looking at the complexities of stories and who's told and who isn't. So let me show you what some of the schools did. So this was a slide developed by Gloria, where she looked up information. She found out it was $1.25. And then their goal was to be paid $1.40. And that on average, they were asked to work about 12 hours a day. And later on, she found out that around sharing rent and with others, it was about $50 a month for rent. Okay. So she built a context-based problem around that. Building off the information she had shared, here's what happened in algebra classroom. They used linear function modeling to model the wages between $1.25 and $1.40. That seems pretty consistent. Anything, we can always create a graph around, right? In another classroom, building off the prompt that Gloria did, they did a choral count. They counted by $1.25, $2.50, $3.75 to practice the count, and then they analyzed the count. Choral counting is a popular CGI strategy. Why don't we use real numbers? Here's an example of a choral count in a pre-K classroom where the question was, rent was around $50 a day. $50 a month. How big is 50 for a pre-K classroom? Look at how they engaged in a choral count, and they looked at patterns between the count to help them understand numbers and number relationships and patterns. So building off Gloria's question. Here's another classroom. Remember how Gloria reminded us that it was $1.25 and their goal was to go to $1.40. So the question was 15 cents difference. Is it that big of a deal? What is the difference in a day and a week? So here you see a 2nd grade classroom, another CGI practice of choral counting, but they were using Gloria's context there. Okay. And then I think a colleague had mentioned this. Some of them were starting to map out Larry Itliang's life and also mapping out the formation of U of W and its impact over time. What I loved about this was in a classroom, they mapped it out differently. Some were mapping out based on dates. Some transitioned the date to look at Larry Itliang's age. This one was done online during the pandemic, and multiple students were doing this. Note how, because of the way it was set up, they had to think about intervals. They had to think about skip counting, where the numbers would play. They had to think about fractions and halving and wholing. Like based on like what's a whole, what's a half, what would be counting to get from 10? What should my intervals be to be able to map out his life? So all the mathematics come into play to make sense of the context over time. So building off what Gloria had given us.